Hey everybody, great to see you again today. Today I'm going to be talking about something that I don't know that I've even spoken about, but one of the big things about running your own business is how do you get the word out there, right? Like at the end of the day, you got to find a way to connect with customers when nobody knows that you exist. And there's a lot of ways to do this, all kinds of ways to do this. You can go in person, you can do organic social content, you can pay for ads. Um, And one of the things that's kind of interesting is I have paid for Facebook ads, Walmart ads, Google ads. I've spent money like magazine ads. I've been in programs at conferences. I've spent money on every different kind of ad that you can think about. But I think the really tricky part about it is different ads have different like barriers to entry and complications that make it really hard to know, am I even doing the right thing, right? Like because one of the big things about sort of the marketing spend is it's this amorphous thing because I would argue that in this space, and there are other people that are probably more expert than am in defining this, but you hear a lot about the marketing funnel, the top of the funnel, the mid funnel, bottom funnel. You hear about these words, but actually putting it into some kind of practice, some kind of play is a lot harder than it feels like. And so while there's this impression that when you're marketing, you're just throwing out a cool idea, and because it's such a cool idea, people will buy it. That's just not how people think and how they work. And so, especially when it comes to Facebook ads, the thing is there is like a $1 barrier to entry. Like if you want to do $1 a day, you can spend as little as that. Yeah, probably won't do anything. I would say if I go back 3 or 4 years ago, I could get away with dollar a day ads and it would kind of do something. Now I think minimum 5, 10 is like the minimum that you could play around with. But even then, I would argue that to actually test the quality of your creative, to know whether or not the thing you're doing is a hook good enough to show value, you're going to end up spending the equivalent of $50 a day over over a 2 week period. Right now, you might spend $1 a day for that many days to get there, but in the end, to find out if you've got a really good creative that's working at a level that could actually turn business, that's what's going on. I mean, that's really what I got out of working with Meta Ads. So sometime earlier this year, I had read a article, something that said really to get the best out of Meta Ads, number one, the sort of AI audience stuff that they're doing now is really, really good. That in fact, it will super optimize super fast and get you to a high click-through rate, a high purchase rate, whatever you're going for. It's very good at that. And so the trick with them is basically, oh, excuse me. But to do that, you have to spend a lot of money. Originally, like, I don't know, 4 or 5 different influencer Meta Ads people were saying $100 a day, which is just impractical. Like for most small businesses, for somebody like me, that's way out of the budget to go $100 a day. I found a few that were saying $50 a day. And so I thought, well, all right, if I consolidate, like I turn off all of my ads except for one product, and then I do it for a short period of time, like basically, burn my whole monthly budget in a very narrow window, maybe I could learn something from that experience to do whatever. So for like the second half of a month, I did that. And then suddenly I got an invitation from a Meta ad specialist saying, hey, I'd love to help. I'm like, oh wow, I guess I spent over the magic number, whatever the magic number is. I don't know why they all of a sudden decided to start talking to me, but they reached out, and then they like, you have a Meta ad specialist now. You have somebody that's going to meet with you periodically and help you spend your ad dollars more effectively and help you, understand what's going on and all of that. And so this has just been a really eye-opening experience because while I'm going to put this, I had targets for, performance. Like I need a certain return on ad spend to make this worth my business, right? Like if you're going to do ads, you need to have an ad spend that makes sense. But what I ended up learning from them was basically Uh, if you have the pixel, like there's this whole Metapixel thing that you install in your website, and based on that, you can watch transactions as they go down sort of the sales funnel, they go through process. You can suddenly get a lot more data. Now, I've had the Pixel for a while and I've played around with it, but I didn't have everything configured correctly. And that was the first thing. Like, I used the wizard in my website thing to set it up so it looked good, but it was actually broken, which is really a problem in and of itself. Like, I was getting bad reporting or incomplete reporting because my Pixel was broken. It just didn't know it. I didn't know how to evaluate. Oh, that's not working as expected. There's something wrong here. So I think the first, good insight or whatever about working with the meta ad specialist is they did a great job of showing me sort of broken things or mistuned things that at the time I clicked the button seemed like the obvious choice. But if you really knew the platform, you would know that's not optimal. It's not the best way to do something. And so I think that's the tricky part about, the meta ads manager generally is it is this tool that has a million knobs and things you can turn on and things you can play with and things you can twist. But it's one of those things where everyone you mess with has its own sort of cascading properties, its own cascading things. So it's really important to narrow down what you're doing to something that's truly unique to like what you're trying to accomplish. Like, you really need to understand that for this task I'm trying to accomplish with meta ads, these are the sets of configuration items that matter, and know how to know whether they're configured correctly or incorrectly, because that was a big problem. So once that was fixed, now we're getting all the sales funnel data. Okay, that was cool. Like, we could tell, who looked at the landing page, who looked at a product page, who added something to the cart, who started the checkout, who actually finished the checkout. We could get all those statistics and get a much better picture of the flow. And I found out by looking at that, we had a lot of people not checking out. Now, that was not an insight I expected to get from Meta Ads Manager. I didn't expect Meta to tell me that people weren't completing the checkout. And so when I went back and looked at it, there was this weird pop-up on mobile that was happening in the middle of the checkout process that confused people, that like made it hard to check out. I just didn't realize that. I missed it in the configuration. So that was, first of all, I think, when I look at the things that they fixed, the most important one was being able to get analytics of everything that was going on that I didn't know. So I think that's the first thing. The second thing I learned from them that was super helpful to me was the system is powerful, but it is, I'll say, fragile under change. So that is to say, if you're tweaking stuff regularly prior to it getting fully trained and fully optimized, the campaign getting fully doing what it's doing, you will find yourself in a position where you've started everything over again. So I think for me, it's one of these things, you've got to do an investment analysis up front to go, for a product that's going to sell, so here's my ad for this product that's going to sell. I need to understand what my metrics are and be okay for probably at least 7 days, if not 14 days, of sort of losing some money along the way. And by that, I mean, for the first 7 to 14 days, it takes a while for it to optimize. Like, it's gotta find audience stuff. It's gotta find people with a propensity to buy. It does a bunch of analysis and stuff. And so for the first part of your journey with an ad, it's probably not going to convert very well. It's just not. And there's two things to that. One of them is it's figuring out the audience. The other thing is your audience has to see this thing multiple times. That's just like the nature of marketing. So if you're expecting in day one, week one, to have a positive ROI with a brand new product you've never advertised before, that's just silly. Like that's just not real. That's not what happens in the real world. Maybe one in, I don't know, 100 on 1 in 1,000 item, but it's got to be something like, the system doesn't know your product well enough to tune it to who needs to go. And you don't know Facebook well enough to know either right out of the gate. So, with an expectation that, hey, I'm going to run this campaign in the first week, It might break even from I might get a 2 ROAS. I might, 1, 2 ROAS. I might get back to even from like the total revenue in versus the total cost. You might be able to cover, but in the end, you're going to lose something. Like while it's figuring it out. Now, that's just, to me, there's a certain level of that is part of the cost of launch, right? In other words, if I'm bringing a new product to market, I've got to figure in to my initial like IP development costs of the product. I got to figure in that the marketing IP itself has a burn-in period that I got to figure out what actually works. And then once you've done that, then you can say, okay, so if I'm making this up a little bit, but let's say your product costs $10,000 to develop. It's a relatively cheap product, simple, $10,000 to develop. But then you're going to need to sell it. You need to run 2 weeks of meta ads at $100 a day, let's say, just arbitrarily. So that's 14 days, $100 a day. That's 1,400. You got another 1,400 on top of your development costs that you got to do to get the ads right to make it go. And so that's a rough example, but just to say, getting the right creative with an audience that converts is a big deal. And so I think that's the next thing that was super interesting about this product was we were creating five creatives. So we had 5 different videos that we were running, and then we'd have 5 different stills, and we were running them through this process the meta ad specialist set us up with. And again, part of this is just trying to figure it out. I don't know what's going to convert. And that was fascinating to watch, like the hook rate of the videos versus the dwell time, people that watched all the way through versus the actual conversions on the other end. And what was really telling was we had a couple places where video hook rate was through the roof, but then people dropped off pretty quick. We had others where the hook rate was a little bit lower, but people stayed to the end. And you could tell that those were the places where we got purchases. So then it turned into, well, how do I get a hook that's good enough that it does stay to the end? And that really changed how we're constructing videos moving forward. And so it could be the case that we get so good at what we're doing that, yeah, the first time we put an ad in, it's really close to profitable, or maybe it's more than profitable. That's possible, but that's only possible after this initial investment in these early ad things that we just don't know what the market wants, like what's really going to hook them. But watching this was really like I learned a ton about how to analyze individual videos or images and comparing images and videos to each other to see how that's going to work out. So that's the second big thing. And then the third one that I found really interesting is my products are in multiple marketplaces, right? So I have stuff on my website, I have stuff on Amazon, I have stuff on Walmart.com, got multiple marketplaces. It is very interesting how the exact same creative for the exact same product is picked up on multiple targets, right? So I've got one particular creative in specific that to my website, I think runs about 30 cents a click. That to Walmart.com is like, or to Amazon.com is like 6 cents a click. But to Walmart.com is 3 cents a click. And so it's very interesting to me to see that, same creative, same content, everything's identical, but the target place, very different, throughput. But then your actual like profitability and a bunch of stuff is very different across those platforms as well. And like actual purchase rate, there's a lot of variance in that. But just to say, that's one of the other things you gotta realize is it's sort of Alex Hormozi has this saying: it's one product, one avatar, one market. Period. Like that's what you do. You focus on a thing and you throw everything at that thing and you get it going. Now, what's interesting right now is because I am in 3 different markets, the way we're approaching that is in the marketplaces. So Amazon, Walmart, Amazon Canada, in these marketplaces, we are using their marketing engine, their base ad engine as the primary way we do stuff. We just run their ad engine there. That's how we do it there. And because that's the point, right? Like at the end of the day, you don't go spend time at the farmer's market to sell stuff to people on your website. At least not typically. That's not unless you're selling a digital good. That's just not why you go to the farmer's market. Same thing here. You don't put stuff in Walmart if you're not going to just use their tools to sell things. That being said, when you have a brand new product that nobody's ever heard of, there is some nuance in, well, I may need to get some external to that market. So the way we've come up with this is we're using sort of this 80-20 rule. And so essentially we look at the successful ad spend in the marketplace. So for the items we're selling in the marketplace and sort of the creative and what we're doing in those marketplaces, as long as those marketplaces are already hitting our return on ad spend goals, like we're doing that and that's sort of maxed out, right? Like we're hitting our goals, we're selling items, we like to sell more items, but short of, and we're constantly experimenting with new keywords and targeting and like all that. We're messing with those things. But how do we get people maybe on another platform over there? So what we've done is we now have a rubric where we basically take what are we spending per month on ads on that platform for that product or for that item. And then we go back to Facebook and we actually take 20% of that amount and we align that to ads we've experimented with this other way to that marketplace. And so that's a little complicated. I probably need to show a picture of this. Maybe I'll do that some other time. But the idea being that the 20% rule is that's seekers. It's people that are just looking for just messing around on the internet. They're not necessarily in market at the time. We're giving them an opportunity to see that there's a thing over on these places they might buy. But we're also balancing that out against, we want to continue to hit our return on ad spend target. So by playing with that 20%, we're able to get everything sort of very clean and clear that 20% of what we're spending on ads to Walmart or 20% of our ads to Amazon, we're spending on seekers off those platforms. And as those platforms grow, and so it's the kind of thing, if we increase overall sales on those other platforms, we'll increase the seeker amount we spend elsewhere. That's something we literally just implemented today. Quite frankly, we've been playing around with a lot of different things, but we've got like very cheap, high click-through rate creatives that we've done through these processes that we've learned from the Meta Ads team. And so now we're able to send people to that. Meanwhile, going back to the kind of one product, one avatar, one market, the bulk of our actual spend on Facebook ads is actually against the Towers of Light series, my book series, and the audio products. We're basically selling to this homeschool audience a very discrete thing with a very discrete budget and targeting. And so we're going to see how that plays out. We've got, we're halfway through that 2-week period I mentioned earlier. So we'll see how the second week goes. If it does optimize the way we believe it will, that's going to work and it's going to be solid, but we'll just have to see. Anyway, I'll see y'all next time.